I'm Jareth Copus. This is Notes from Underground. We're a brand new show that's going to be cutting through the massive amounts of information that you can get today and helping you discern what's real and what's fake. Our very first episode is going to cover Belarus. Belarus has largely been able to remain out of mainstream Western media. The occasional story comes out, especially during its presidential election times, but nothing of real significance. If you were to ask any everyday American about Belarus, most probably wouldn't even know it's a country, let alone be able to find it on a map. So let's take a closer look at it. The Republic of Belarus is a landlocked country in Eastern Europe. To its northeast is Russia, to its south Ukraine, the west Poland, and to the northwest Lithuania and Latvia. Its capital is Minsk, and most of its population lives in urban settings. Over 40% of this country is covered with forests, and its major economic sectors are the service industry and manufacturing. Like many other former Soviet republics, Belarus has only been independent for just over 20 years now. Belarus's current status is what I call a manufactured state, which is similar to that of Ukraine, Armenia, Estonia, and Georgia, countries that after the destruction of the Soviet Union fell into a false independence based on subjugation to one power or the other. This subjugation was largely controlled by the use of either minority ultra-nationalist or anti-Soviet groups, or a combination of the two, such as the Banderites in Ukraine. So Belarus has been a little different than other Soviet bloc countries after the fall of communism. First and foremost, they didn't really have an large enough anti-Soviet presence. Neither did they have a large ultra-nationalist movement like the Banderites. They remained fairly aligned with the Russian Federation. They actually kept a lot of their previous Soviet-era policies straight out of the bat. They kept free healthcare, a heavily centralized industry. They also even kept the name KGB for their police service. And the man at the helm has been Alexander Lukashenko from the start. He's been the president for over 20 years now, and many claim he's the last dictator in Europe. Despite what is said about Lukashenko in the Western media, he has been able to keep a relatively high amount of popularity in Belarus itself. Lukashenko is nothing if not a clever man, and he's kind of allowed himself, either through sincerity or through slyness, to be portrayed as this strong man, authoritarian figure that's pro-Russian and sides with Putin. This not only allowed him to keep up that popularity that he has in his country, but also allowed him to push on Putin and push on the Russian Federation for economic aid, because as far as Belarus is, it's nowhere near the level of economic success as the Russian Federation is, and they have required a lot of support throughout the years, and Russia has been happy to provide that. Now, along with that, Russia has sought to reintegrate Belarus into the Russian Federation, and they have had multiple talks regarding this, but normally around the last minute, Lukashenko walks away from the table. So finally Russia got a little fed up with this, and they've kind of stepped away from Belarus, and Belarus in turn decided that they were going to step towards the West, and this was their biggest mistake. In an attempted show of power, here you can see Lukashenko meeting with, of all people, Mike Pompeo.
Your point is well taken. I did in my previous role have the opportunity to save lives in Belarus and save lives all across the world by working to defeat terrorism together. And your team, your service was spectacular. We appreciate that. I hope now in my new role that we can build on that we can help deliver foreign investment opportunities for the people of Belarus that works in the best interest of the United States. And to provide an opportunity for Belarus to have the sovereignty and independence that I know you want it to have. We understand you're a neighbor. There's a long history with Russia. It's not about picking us between the two. We want to be here. You'll see we've built our team diplomatically here by almost double. We'll do that again. We'll have an ambassador here before too long. You know, we are working on some of the concerns we have on human rights here, where we will continue to seek those reforms and to push to ensure that those freedoms and the individuals are protected.
Now, discussed at this meeting were a great number of things, mostly economic, including the possibility of the U.S. providing Belarus with what is, quote, 100% of its oil and gas needs at competitive rates. Now, this would be a huge blow to Russia, obviously, seeing as Russia is the sole provider of oil and gas to Belarus. So this sent up major red flags in Russia, showing that obviously the West was trying to move in for a bigger, greater sphere of influence, again, right at its doorstep. The West had clearly taken notice of the rift forming between Russia and Belarus, and started making moves to take advantage of it. The U.S. has in place the groundwork for a new hybrid form of warfare in nearly every country in Eastern Europe. This very specific and intricate form of warfare is often referred to as the color revolution. Now, the color revolution has been utilized in multiple nations, multiple countries all around the world. Often it's been very successful. If you look at Serbia during the time of Milosevic, if you look at Ukraine, perhaps the most well-known example of a successful color revolution. But they actually have failed as well. And one of the places it has failed before is Belarus. The West had tried to gain support with a youth group called Zuber, and this youth group sought to remove Lukashenko and helped support different opposition figures. They even got recognition by Condoleezza Rice. But this group failed miserably. Lukashenko sniffed it out from the start, as he's somewhat doing now, and was able to quell this Western-backed rebellion before it could really get off the ground. This color revolution normally starts that way, with the West picking a specific group, whether it be a youth group, a group of ultra-nationalists, a group of anti-Soviets. Most of the time this is a minority group, but the West gives these minority groups such great influence, such great monetary support that they're able to quickly swell their numbers. Now, this seems to be starting again in Belarus. The first shot in this color revolution is that of expanding the rift between Russia and Belarus in the media. What you see here is the highly publicized arrest of 33 Russians in Belarus. This story is still fairly new, with it only occurring within the past few weeks, so new information is still coming out. That doesn't stop the Western media from claiming that hundreds of Russian mercenaries had been arrested, when in actuality it was 33 people. Their ties are actually being investigated, and we're going to look further into that. But let's also take a look at where the information that led to these arrests came from. Now, Lukashenko himself has stated that he received the information from none other than the Ukrainian SBU. Now, the Ukrainian SBU is a special forces unit from Ukraine that does absolutely nothing without the explicit approval of the U.S. government. They are perhaps the worst source of unbiased information on anything to do with Russia in the entire world. Nonetheless, this is just the first point of the questionable accuracy of this story. As we take a closer look, it's even apparent that the first point really is unnecessary. The thought that an action of this scale, this grand of platform, could happen inside of Belarus is actually quite laughable. As I stated earlier, there have already been uprisings like this, these false flag uprisings, these attacks on Belarus, that have been thwarted, and they have been thwarted by the Belarusian KGB. The Belarusian KGB has a track record of being able to quell these types of things. So why don't we take an even more detailed look at the actual story? A group of Russian security guards, many of whom had fought in the war in Donbass on the side of the republics, were hired by a firm in Belarus to provide their services in a number of different countries around the world. Now, this group was flown to Belarus and were scheduled to depart from Minsk, en route to their separate destinations around the world. Now, there was a mysterious delay at the airport, and the group was sent to a local hotel. Now, this is the hotel where SWAT teams swarmed that night and caught these men unawares. They were all, as you could see from the video, sleeping in their underwear, happily ready to move on to their specific jobs that they were contracted to do. Now, authorities based their raid largely on now, this is another absurd fact. They based their raid, or so they said, on the fact that this group of men had been quiet at the bar that night, that they hadn't caused trouble, and that they hadn't been harassing women. They found it strange and out of the ordinary for these men not to have been doing that. So, they formed this raid against these men because they were being too polite in a foreign country. So what can be ascertained from this is that the SBU had clear intentions and an intricately planned mission to push Russia and Belarus into a confrontation during this time of strained relations between the two countries. Much of this is now becoming even clearer due to investigations as well as the release of the information by the SBU. The Ukrainians, again, they have now failed miserably, just as they did in Maidan, to cover their tracks. So let's delve even further. The information about the operation starts with a man called Sergei Petrovich. Now, this Sergei Petrovich made a number of calls from Syria to the men that had been arrested. He had claimed that he was a major player, quote unquote, in the PMC Wagner out of Russia, the private military company Wagner, which has been bandied about in media stories for a long time now in Syria. Not only this, but he was also a high-ranking Ministry of Defense member, holding the rank of at least colonel. So he's claiming to be this highly respectable, highly reputable man in the Russian military. Multiple former soldiers, security force members, soldiers of fortune, and many other people were contacted by this Sergei Petrovich with an offer that would be hard to refuse. Sergei started off by saying this lucrative security job was not for the faint of heart and would take on only those with an extensive active military background. And that's precisely what these men had. A good majority of them had joined the people in the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republic in their struggle against the Ukrainian fascists. It's as if they were targeted specifically because of this fact, because they had fought in the war in Donbass. Now, why would they be targeting specifically men who had fought on the side of the republics in the war in Donbass? That's the point I'm going to leave you with at the end of this episode today. For I don't seek to force feed you information. My goal is to make you think. We're going to be discussing further the situation in Belarus in future episodes. I hope you enjoyed our first episode. Go ahead and like and subscribe. And check me out again. I'm Jareth Copus on Notes from Underground.